Hey everybody, it's Matt Robinson. Welcome to another edition of the Writer's Block. Medical cannabis is becoming quite the hot topic, but it is very much the wilderness and we could all use a guide. Fortunately, I have found one for you. It's Dr. Benjamin Caplan from right here in Needham, but I'm sure he will be a known name all over the place. His fabulous book, the Doctor-Approved Cannabis Handbook, really one and only, and but totally comprehensive, totally easy to read, easy to get through, really opened up my mind without even trying anything. So in addition to being the author of this great book, Dr. Caplan is the co-founder and chief medical officer of the CED Clinic, CED Foundation, and EO Care Incorporated, and is really at the forefront of delivering exceptional patient care and spearheading the development of cannabis education platforms. His clinic has treated 18,000 patients and supervised the guidance and data collection of over 300,000 more. So the research is being done, folks. We're going to talk about it. But first of all, Dr. Caplan, welcome to the Writer's Block.
Matt, thanks for having me. I'm excited to share and learn about how Needham can improve with cannabis.
Well, hopefully how the world can. Hopefully we'll get the word out. So how did you get into medicine, and then how did you pick this particular lane, as it were?
Some viewers might know me from right here at Honeywell in Highland. I used to work at the BI in primary care. I'm a family doc. And one day I just kept hearing from patients that they found cannabis helpful and didn't know anything about it. So I did what I was taught to do, is go to the literature, read up about what is published, what is known, and I realized that there's maybe 10 times more literature about cannabis and the components of cannabis than the common cold or than Lyme disease. So here I was seeing this fountain of information that nobody really has a handle on. Nobody's teaching it. We have folks online spewing theories and spewing ideas. We have the media that's trying to read scientific literature and doing that badly, but we don't have any real leadership in the medical community. So I decided to see what I could do. I pulled together the research. I tried to translate it so that people could help me understand what I was reading, and I opened up this clinic right here in Needham, CED Clinic, where people can come and get care and learn. And then from my clinical learning, from the published literature, I developed this puppy, which is sharing everything I've learned with the public.
Well, why do so many people say there's no research, it's not proven? Why is there that bias against this modality that's perfectly viable?
Well, we all grew up in a culture that demonized cannabis. You know, we all heard cannabis was a stepping stone to harder drugs and to becoming evil criminals and, sort of gang organizations. And of course, there was no truth to that. But it was passed on generation after generation. Cannabis used to be in the pharmacopoeia. It was the most prescribed medicine that doctors gave, back 200, 300 years ago. Truly, cannabis has been part of the medical repertoire for thousands of years. But in the 30s, there was greed and politics happening just like there is today. And what happened out of the 1930s was the Marijuana Tax Act, which prevented growers from growing cannabis and making a living out of it. That then persuaded the AMA to take cannabis and put it on the enemy list instead of the therapeutic list. And slowly but surely, doctors stopped learning. And they stopped challenging what they were hearing from patients. They stopped telling patients it was okay for them to help themselves. They needed pharmaceutical medicines instead of natural medicines. And we all kind of evolved as a culture the wrong way, at least when it comes to plant-based medicine.
Well, I understand from your book that, like with so many other issues, even today, the media had something to do with the shutting of the door. Can you retell that story?
Of course. No, I mean, today, even still, I'm online. I now have a website and I have newsletters where I'm reading published literature. The Journal of American Heart Association just came out with a paper back in February saying cannabis was evil for hearts. It's hurting hearts. And if you read one paper and you read it very quickly, maybe you would come away with that. But someone who is skeptical about what they read, someone who looks and learns about heart disease and about cannabis would say, no, that's ridiculous. People who consume cannabis have heart attacks. Yeah, you know what? People who don't consume cannabis have heart attacks too. And when someone is struggling, when they're having suffering, and they feel like their doctor isn't listening to them, what are they going to do? They're just going to sit in the corner and suffer? No, they're going to go and help themselves. And people who have heart trouble, who are depressed, who are old and not taking care of themselves, maybe they're going to seek cannabis to feel better. So with that reality, someone who's self-caring with cannabis and has a heart attack, there's an association there. That doesn't mean the cannabis is causing the heart attack, no more than tissues are causing depression. Someone who's sad cries and uses tissues, but there's an association between tissues and depression, just like there's an association between cannabis and heart disease, but it's not causal.
So there was the story about William Randolph Hearst.
Sure.
And how you talk greed and the media kind of, I mean, that's where they came together.
Right.
And my understanding was that because he was using so much paper and owned the paper mills and the means of production, hemp was verboten to him, and so he needed to find a way to kind of quash that. And so
Right.
he used his publications and his influence to also close the door from a different angle.
Exactly, right. No, in the 30s, there was an invention called a decorticator, which looked like one of those old push lawnmowers. And it could chop up hemp and make pulp so that they could make paper much faster than oak trees could make paper. And William Randolph Hearst owned the oak trees, he owned the papers, he owned the mills to make it, and he saw this as a huge threat to his business. So of course he does what he can. He meets in politics. He either lobbied himself or hired lobbyists, just like we do today. And he met with Harry Anslinger, who was the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics at the time, and said, let's make hemp history. And Anslinger, being a good Christian, thought this was against Christian values, and so, okay, let's make this the enemy and do the righteous thing. Long story short, we have cannabis being buried without anyone defending it. And we have him, Harry Anslinger, we have William Randolph Hearst successful in making their money, making their success.
So how was it, what was the feedback you got from the medical community, from your colleagues, when you said, I'm going to go pursue this and try to reopen this area?
I got a hearty, hey, Dr. Caplan, do we need an intervention here? I mean, people think I'm crazy because I'm going against the grain. I'm vouching for what I see from clinic, what I'm learning from my own patients, and I'm going against what is usual, which is doctors prescribing pills, and that's all they really think about. Oh, you're a patient, they don't really get to know you because, boy, they have someone else waiting. So they get a quick glimpse of your diagnosis. They don't know where you're coming from, what you're suffering from. There's not a personality there. It's a diagnosis of a person, of an illness. Doctors give pills to make happy people, and then see you later. The next person comes in. And it's this turnstile medicine approach that has really sucked the soul out of medicine. And cannabis, on the other hand, is this big unknown. I mean, we know pieces of it, but we don't know how it fits into the big picture because we haven't been taught. There aren't people that I can really turn to learn from. There are published literature that tells us, one piece of the puzzle, another piece of the puzzle, but the whole pie is still a mystery. And in that mystery, I get to learn from patients. I get to learn about what they're doing at home, what works, what doesn't work, and I'm sort of trying to carve out a protocol for how cannabis medicine really helps people. And that's exactly what the Doctor-Approved Cannabis Handbook is. I'm sharing what I've learned so far from patients so that everybody who's watching and reading can learn.
What are some of the other big misconceptions that you've come upon?
Addiction is probably the biggest. People think because we all grew up in this idea that you're going to be addicted if you do cannabis. It's interesting because as I have my coffee of the morning, coffee of the afternoon, coffee of the evening, I'm not worried about addiction there. Or as I wear glasses all the time, I'm not worried about being addicted. Because maybe caffeine helps you, actually. And we know from scientific literature and our own experience that I feel better with caffeine. I don't have too many bad sides with caffeine. And same thing with glasses. The more I wear glasses, the clearer I see. So there are dependencies where we lean on something to feel better that aren't addictions. And similarly with cannabis, we have dependencies. People who are anxious or not sleeping well find that the cannabis helps them sleep through the night. Is that a problem that they get good sleep? Where's the problem coming up? They might be using it every night, but there's no downside. If they're getting good sleep and they feel better and they have healthier immune systems because they're sleeping, I'd call that a win. So that's not an addiction, but it might be a dependency. And that's a nuance I think is somewhat new for a lot of people.
And like I said before, with the tissue and depression, or with coffee, anything can be abused.
Sure.
And unfortunately, I mean, I guess the largest case now would be opioids. We hear about those cases, and that is become the prevalent case for that medical class. But I think because of the media, we saw, reefer madness. It's like that was the popular perception, was that it will drive you crazy, even though that was maybe politically influenced and not really the honest truth. So you're quite the white knight. Try to now, if it was kind of squelched in the United States, is there literature from the rest of the world that continued during the 20th century?
It was not suppressed literature. It was harder. There's more red tape. There's more fire hoops to jump through. But there are a lot of clinicians out there. There are a lot of researchers who have done research. There's just not a lot of longitudinal practices where doctors are getting to know patients and seeing them over a long period of time and then publishing about it. That's the sort of passing of the baton that's common in the medical profession, where we see things that work, we see things that don't work, and we pass it on to our students. But what my predecessors passed on was misinformation, misunderstanding, sort of just the kibosh. But there are plenty of studies out there to read on both sides of this debate. There are studies that show people get cognitive impairment from cannabis, for example. Everybody's worried also about how is this going to make me, sort of think. Because when you take cannabis, sometimes you feel relaxed, you feel dazed, you feel not focused. Of course, there is other cannabis which has the opposite effect, and you do feel focused. But suffice it to say, cannabis had this idea that it was making people dumber. And studies would say, okay, we're going to give people cannabis and we're going to test them and see how they do. And you know what? They showed decreased effect. They showed that when people were taking tests, that they didn't do as well as the people who weren't taking cannabis. So some rebel researcher, 15 years later, this was the late 80s, repeated those studies and said, you know what? It's not fair that when they're taking the test, they're still under the influence of this substance. So they took patients, they did a study at the beginning and showed some decreased cognition, and then they did a study again, but they took away the cannabis. They said, for 3 days, you can't consume any cannabis. And all of those results that showed people feeling dumbed down vanished. So we know from cannabis there is an effect. It's actually a medicine that's working when you take it. But if you remove it, you're back to where you were before. There's no difference. It's not making people dumb.
And there's no long-term damage like with alcohol or cigarettes or things of that sort?
Not because of the product. If I gave you sleeping pills all the time, and I said, look, I studied those sleeping pills and they don't show that they hurt anybody long time. But if you fall asleep through all of your classes and you stop learning and you stop practicing, you're probably not going to do well on tests. So there's a behavioral aspect of medicines which does affect us. In other words, cannabis itself doesn't cause problems in everybody across the board. But for people who don't have the skills to engage with life, which is hard, if you are really depressed all the time and you find cannabis, it makes you feel better, but it makes you sort of so relaxed that you don't get dressed up for an interview, you're probably not going to get that job. Or if you're content with cannabis, having been depressed, and you don't need to ask for friends' help, you don't need a shoulder to cry on anymore, you might lose those social skills for when you do need it. If you don't have the cannabis, who can help you? So there's a skill aspect of taking a medicine which gets lost in some people. They use too much and they just forget how to engage with life normally. For that group, they're going to have serious long-term issues. But I wouldn't blame the cannabis. I would blame their habits.
But if it is so individualized, like how it affects different people, how do you guide your patients and clients as to, because to my understanding from the book, another important part of the puzzle is how often you take it and the strength you take. So how do you guide someone if you're not quite sure the impact it's going to have?
You know, Matt, I do something absolutely crazy.
You ask.
I don't treat people all like the same person.
Oh.
You know, medicine as a field treats everybody like they're a 70-kilogram white man. You know, what about women? What about older people? What about younger people? We have to sort of massage the evidence to try to fit the person. And I think that's backwards. I think we should learn about individuals, understand what they're going through. Oh, you're depressed? Oh, I see it's the anniversary of your partner's death. Maybe that's an explanation. And I'm not going to learn that unless I talk to you, unless I get to know who you are. And that's the way medicine always has been. Over the years, doctors and patients had a long-term relationship. They got to know patients, and patients got to know their doctors, and there was a give and take. And that's largely gone in this managed care, where you only have 15 minutes with a doctor, and this isn't my doctor, this is someone filling in. I mean, that's reality these days. And this doctor, my insurance doesn't cover. There's a whole baloney on top of regular medicine. And cannabis gets to strip that away. I get to meet people and talk to them and learn about what their needs are. And guess what? In 3 months, it might be different. Maybe they have a beautiful relationship and they don't need as much cannabis anymore. Maybe they're not sleeping because they got a good job, and I can understand that and explain to them how they can change their medical routine. It's an old school medicine, which shouldn't be new and shocking, but here we are.
So you're really going back to the doctor with the little black bag.
I am, yeah. I mean, the virtual version of it. Yeah, no, I see patients and I get to know them before I see them. And if they haven't read the book, I get to walk them through the simple decisions that I can help them make through cannabis. Or I have some patients I see every week, and we make calls and we see, how are you doing this week? Oh, did you try that product? Did that work for you? No, it was too much. Okay, well, this is what you do. And I get to walk with people who want that kind of guidance.
Does it involve therapy, psychological therapy in a way?
It's funny, in medical school, they teach doctors that no matter what field of medicine you go into, you're going into psychiatry. Because in some way you have to talk to people, you have to get to know them. You can't be a jerk all the time. You have to get to understand what patients need. And for one patient, it might be different than another. So there is a little bit of adaptation that I do as a clinician. And I guess you can call that psychiatry, or call that therapy. But everybody comes from a different place and they need different aspects of a doctor. So I have to be sensitive to their needs.
So in addition to convincing the medical establishment and your colleagues, there are probably a lot of people you see who are using other modalities like prescriptions or what have you.
Sure.
How do you bridge them? Do you do both for a little while? Is it very transitional, or is that's probably individualized as well?
No, it's a great point. So I'm not an anti-medicine doctor. I believe in traditional evidence-based medicine, but I also believe there's something here to plant medicine that we should learn about. And I first check to make sure that it's safe, and we know cannabis is incredibly safe. It's actually somewhat safer than most other medicines we prescribe and most other medicines that are over the counter. So I learn where someone is coming from first. I see that it's safe, and then I guide them with what will be best for them as an individual. If someone is taking other medicines, my usual philosophy is I don't want to mix up the party here. I'm not coming in and like Kool-Aid bashing everybody around. I want them to feel comfortable, and that might mean trying certain aspects of cannabis that I think will work for them slowly, and they'll see how they feel. Most other medicines do interact with cannabis, but not in a bad way. Antidepressants, for example, and cannabis are both processed in the liver. And if the liver is busy processing their pharmaceutical medicines, the cannabis will be stronger. And vice versa, if the liver is processing their cannabis, then their other medicines are going to be stronger. So it's actually a perfect match to walk through slowly, take the cannabis on top of the regular medicines, and it's going to be a little bit stronger. And then as time goes on and they're comfortable with how cannabis feels, we can talk about removing some of their other medicines. My take is also I want to be collaborative. I want other doctors to see me as an ally. And I don't take patients off their medicines. I recommend to their doctor who's prescribing it that they talk about reducing the dosage because you're getting what you need out of it. You don't need any more.
You mentioned that there are different situations depending on the age, the size, the medical history. As a teacher, I see a lot of children on medications that I think that their doctors rush to prescription. Mm-hmm. That's a topic for a different show, perhaps. But what is the age range to at least start to educate yourself?
I mean, kids are going to do whatever they're going to do, whether or not the grown-ups say okay. I think most of us know that as parents. The question is, when is a good time to talk to the kids, and what kind of relationship do parents want to have with their children? I'm in no position to tell everybody what to do, but I think it's totally sensible for a parent to have an open, honest conversation with their kid. It's also totally reasonable for a parent to not talk about it at all, depending on how their relationship is with their child. In general, I recommend that parents have open communication. Their kids are going to learn it from their friends, and we have to ask ourselves as parents, what kind of information do we want our child to have? Do we want them to look to Dr. Google? Do we want our kids to look for the pothead dealer friend? Is that where we want them to get what they know? Usually the answer is no. So if parents are communicating with their child, what kind of information should they have? I think they should have both risks and benefits. If they only talk about cannabis being the evil thing that's going to make you stupid, it's going to make you bad in school, and then they see their friends at school who are consuming cannabis maybe with a medical license, doing well in classes, being better behaved in classes, they're going to think you're lying as a parent. That's not good. So parents need to have both risks and benefits information, and that's what the Doctor-Approved Cannabis Handbook is about. It's giving people clear evidence that supports the benefits of cannabis, not just the risks.
So with each individual, you said you're not anti-medicine, you're not trying to replace. What sort of relationships do you make with their other medical advisors? Do you reach out to their primary care physicians, or how does the relationship work?
I reach out so desperately. I have sent postal letters, postcards, I've sent emails to all the primary care doctors I can find. Literally, I spent at least $400 with postage and postal stamps and letters trying to let them know that I'm here, that I want to communicate, I want to collaborate. But I'm outside the system. The system doesn't have cannabis involved. So it's a real tricky thing that these doctors have to feel comfortable communicating with another board-certified physician, but it's outside the system and it's against the grain. So it's a really awkward thing. So what I've done lately is I give my patients a letter, which is, hey, this is me, this is what I'm trying to do. I've published with the New England Journal of Medicine, I've published a book now, I'm legit, I'm showing my cards. Please talk to me. I want to work with you as a clinician, with your patient, to get them the health that they deserve.
Being that Massachusetts has been very progressive with medical cannabis, but we weren't first to the party. Why have you been able to find colleagues of similar mind in Colorado, in other places that have been also on this movement?
I've found a lot of colleagues who are cool, man. Yeah, cannabis is awesome. Like, no, that's not really what I'm looking for. I want someone who's skeptical, who is looking at literature critically, and finding those colleagues is hard. There are a couple, and we sort of bump into each other online mostly. But many clinicians have had a hard time developing a clinic for themselves or sharing their perspectives in a way that's well received. I think, to some degree, there aren't too many of us. And my hope, part of the hope with this book and with my efforts online, are to engage with other clinicians and help motivate people to question the rules we're living with.
So, is your end goal to sort of duplicate yourself or make like your own medical course line?
I can hear my wife saying, "Hell no, no."
I meant in this capacity.
Yes, no. I think no. Because I don't have all the answers. I have my perspective and I have my passion for my sort of learning. But I want other people to have their own passions. There are going to be subspecialties of cannabis out there. Cannabis is amazing for pediatrics. But that's so scandalous. And we think, oh my God, what about the kids? What about the kids' brains? All that sort of old garbage comes up again. But someone who is a dedicated pediatrician has plenty of literature to found a business on, to found a whole specialty on. And if they start seeing pediatric patients in longitudinal care, they're going to learn that this is really helping certain patients if they have guidance. And you know what? There's a geriatrician who finds, oh my God, this is really helping older adults. And if only they had cannabis, they could find relief from their dementia or osteoporosis. There's so many subspecialties of cannabis that are relevant and useful. I hope those clinicians find interest, find literature out there to read, and stimulate a practice of their own. It doesn't have to be like mine. I'm a sort of generalist. I'm trying to show and put out all these fires that there's opportunity here. But my way is certainly not the only right way.
Well, to go back to your earlier point, it's been around for ages and ages and ages, and was the preeminent form of curing and dealing with issues and maladies. Can we get back there?
Oh, great question. I think the cat is certainly out of the bag, and we have cannabis now in 38 states plus territories and legal in 8 or 9 countries now, against all of the odds. In this country, cannabis was the Schedule I substance, and now they're talking about rescheduling it. And people are jailed because of it. And there's politicians who yap and yap on TV saying it is evil. And even against that, the people have said, no, that's baloney. I know that this is better than that because I've heard about it. I've seen my friends getting better sleep. I've heard about it helping anxiety. I've heard about it helping pain. My friend who had cancer should have died 3 years ago, but isn't, and she's using cannabis. People have known the truth about cannabis and have risen to make it where it is today against all of these odds. So I think it's going to be a tough battle, but I think the battle to make cannabis a part of normal life has to be won with knowledge. And that's what I'm trying to empower.
And that seems to keep you motivated against some pretty fierce odds these days.
Yeah, man, stick it to the man. I think.
But you are the man. You're part of the medical establishment also.
Right. So yes. I mean, I guess that's an interesting position because I'm sort of trying to bridge. I don't look like a pothead. I'm not a pothead, so I'm not a threat to the medical establishment. But I also don't spew the same old garbage that the medical establishment says. So I think the cannabis community sees me as an ally, and I am. I'm trying to we all live together. We have to live in harmony. And finding the path forward, I think, has to be a little bit of give and take, no matter what side of the debate you're on.
Right. Well, clearly, people educating themselves and finding out what the real situation is and how it might work for them, at least exploring it, is a definite first step. Mm-hmm. And that's why it was so great to have you here and so great to have the book. Please check it out. If you're curious at all, if you've been thinking about it, this is a great first step. You can call your clinic and get in touch if you need more of a hand holding. But it really is. I mean, this is my personal copy, and you can see all the dog ears and the tags and the notes. It was a real eye opener. I really hadn't considered it myself before, but there is something to it, and I think education is the key. And this is our teacher, and it's a pleasure to have you. And thank you very much for being on the show, and thank you for joining us on the Writer's Block.